Healthcare is going to require an enormous amount of learning. So we'll take a little stroll through that, and we'll intersperse some audience participation and some questions along the way. One of the things I want to start with in terms of one of the fundamental elements of change in the world of learning is the enormous increase in expectations that learners have. The learner is, in fact, rising in her expectations way faster than we can imagine. The learner has an expectation that their content is going to come to them in formats that are more current than most institutions want to provide, are more media-rich than we are necessarily prepared to involve, more social in its contextualization, rich in context, and they are also looking at learning content coming to them in formats that I would argue are more granular and more flexible. Now, what that means, if we look at that and if we deconstruct that, is that the learner is being deeply affected by what they're getting outside of the classroom, that they want to get some of that same richness in their digital classroom or in their distance classroom or in their online classroom. One of the things that I've been tracking has been the rise of what we call social learning. And I think if in your own institutions, I would tell you to pay very strong attention to that. And it is not, I want to disavow you, it is not about let's give everybody a Twitter account or let's put everybody on a bulletin board, because what we've known over time is that if we give people a bulletin board, I remember in the early days when Learning Space came out and other elements, is if you build a bulletin board, not everybody will go to it, very few people keep going to it, and the bulletin boards often get way off focus, and they're populated by the bored, angry, and socially dysfunctional. Okay, and that I continue to believe as a lifelong instructor and as a lifelong academic researcher that if we in fact want to have optimized learning environments, they require us to do design and facilitation. Design and facilitation. That you can't just build it and assume that they're going to come. You've got to decide what does it look like. And by the way, the same thing happens if you give a party. You give a great party, it's not just let's have our 10 friends over. First you got to figure out, well, I'm going to invite 10, but I'm really not going to invite that couple with this couple. You know, and by the way, I'm probably going to have this kind of food, or I'm going to have these kinds of beverages. And by the way, we know that people have different eating and drinking requirements. And when am I going to start it? And might I have music there? And I even, when I give a party, have 9 provocative questions that I'm going to float out to the group at a given time. It's a design issue. In fact, what I would argue is that in the world of distributed and online learning, the role of design is even more important than ever. But what social learning is going to challenge us with is the concept that our learners are wanting to be in a more highly social environment, and it's our challenge as institutions to design those environments that they facilitate, that they maximize, and that they stretch the learning process. And ironically, we don't have a lot of experience with that. This is an evolving field. I'll give you an interesting corporate example. One of the groups that we have a learning consortium that has about 250 Fortune 500 companies. And one of the groups in our learning consortium decided that they wanted to do away with the traditional orientation, new employee orientation. How many of you remember your new employee orientation? It's the most forgettable life experience that you could possibly have. Because inevitably the organization will come and they'll show this videotape about the mission of the organization, and if it's been around long enough, the founder is a child walking across a field and saying someday they want to have this kind of a thing, and then they give you all this important information you want to have on the first day, like 401 retirement forms that you should fill out, and then there's the sexual harassment module that you're getting, and all of that's important, but what do most people want to know on their first day on the job? When do I get paid? Where are the bathrooms? How do I log on? And who do I go to lunch with? Okay? And instead we design a download of probably about 7,000% more content than any of them want to have. So this organization, and by the way, it's an interesting organization. I happen to be on their board of visitors of their university, is the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. CIA decided that their traditional orientation didn't work. So here's what they decided to do instead. They decided that what if instead of doing that, first of all, they had their orientation not the first day, but if they had their orientation 6 weeks into the job. Because guess what? After 6 weeks, we start to actually have enough questions that we're interested in that. What if they gave them a list of everything that they needed to know and then gave them a map of people in the organization who might help them know that? What if they actually paired them up to have targeted, content-oriented lunches with key people in the organization? In other words, what if they designed interactions that became rich learning experience opportunities for them? And I would argue that in social learning, whether we want to or not right now, we are going to have to expand our horizons of what that's going to be. And think of the richness of that. The ability of that person to now have interactions with people around the world. The ability for us to harness the alumni of our course. I got somewhat famous for this, or at least well known. There was an article on Fast Company about me, and one of the quotes they quoted was, I said, universities are so dumb. You have to always be careful because they'll pick up that one phrase to put as the headline. But you had to read the rest of the paragraph. I said, universities are the only business in the world that spend between $1,000 and $5,000 to recruit a customer, and after 4 years fire them in a ceremony involving a gown and music as they move across the stage. Okay. But then I went on to say that universities are dumb to fire their graduates because they're under this delusion that they're going to become donors. And in fact, they probably won't even give back a half of what we spend to try to get them to donate until they're age 40. So what if instead of being donors, if we viewed them as continuing education learners and members of our learning community from the moment, so when they got off the end of the stage, what if instead of giving them, which we do at Skidmore too, an alumni card, because we're hoping to get a check, we gave them a password into their first year alumni experience. Because guess what? They're going to need distributed learning if they've been on a campus in that first year more than anyone else will. Because now they're going to have to figure out, how do I get a job? Now they're going to have to figure out, how do I keep a job? Now they're going to have to suddenly wish they had paid attention during their Economics 101 class. Or they would really thrive that they might have actually taken that business writing class that they took along the way. Or if they're an artist, that they would have taken a course on negotiations. Or in fact, if they're a business person, they might have taken a course on art along the way. I would argue that we are moving into an environment where we are going to have an opportunity to serve our alumni populations in an enormously interesting and even profitable way. And that I think our institutions are going to have to think out of the box with that. One of the other learning changes that are happening, and I think it is a provocative change, and I just brought up a couple of pieces of technology, once again, not to fall in love with it, but, oops, I dropped one, are these little 3 pieces of technology that, by the way, are always in my pockets, and my wife always says that I shouldn't carry them because it makes my pants droop and stuff. So like, she's always taking them out and I'm putting them back in. But my smartphone, and it could be an iPhone or anything, my little flip cam, and my USB port. Why do I think they are disruptive? I think they're disruptive in a fascinating way. And once again, I don't want you to fall in love with the technology, but I want you to track what it's doing to our learners, because ultimately it has an impact on what we as institutions can be doing. Let's start with the smartphone. And once again, whether it's an iPhone, and by the way, I was supposed to be at the Apple store this morning, but it was more important to be here, so I am now 2.5 days late in getting this upgraded. But sometimes it's good because the first units may not work. But what I want to give you an interesting phrase that somebody said to me, and it's been rattling through my brain. They said, the smartphone is increasingly becoming a cognitive prosthetic. A cognitive prosthetic. You know, and every now and you get something and you write it down and you go, that's too much to think about right now. I'm going to have to think about it tomorrow or the next day. And then I started to look at it and I suddenly realized that I, in fact, am walking around with a cognitive prosthetic. Right now I'm engaged in 4 learning projects on my iPhone. I have a brother-in-law who speaks sign language, and I've finally reached a moment that I have to get better at sign language, and I downloaded a really interesting application that if I type in a phrase, it then actually has an animation that acts out the signing. And so I've set a goal for myself to spend about half an hour a day learning sign. Now I'm not telling, and don't tell Eric if you see him, but I want to wait till at some point where he suddenly realizes that I've caught on. I am right now trying to also get better at anatomy. And I downloaded an interesting set of Netter flashcards that are used by doctors that are, and by med students that are anatomy-based in that sense. And not that I have anything wrong with my anatomy, but one of the things I decided I wanted to do was take a look at that. One of the things that I really find helpful here is that I'm a big fan of public toilets as somebody who travels a lot. And there's a wonderful application on here sponsored by Charmin called Sit or Squat. Okay? And what it is it's a social networking system that evaluates and rates public toilets. And it actually uses GPS to find out where you are, and so in Saratoga, it will point you to Borders and Starbucks. I've recently put on one, and I have somebody who I don't like, and I'm thinking of listing his house later today as one of the elements in that. So you've always got to be careful that misinformation may occur as well. But I can't think of a cognitive prosthetic that comes more in handy as somebody who's traveling of knowing where to go, and so much better to know where it is. So if it literally will tell you in Borders where it is, and by the way, what sections you're passing on the way in and way out. And then the fourth thing that I'm carrying on here is that I've involved myself recently in a reading club. And it's a reading club made up of about 50 people like myself who do keynote speeches related to business learning in the future. And the only thing that we are doing in this club is every week we're listing all the books that we read, so that amongst the 50 of us, we end up seeing what we're reading in that sense. It is an intriguingly cognitive prosthetic. Now, there are multiple other elements there, but let me share with you what is probably most provocative about the iPhone or the smartphone. The average application is built in 2.5 days. The average application has 290 lines of code in it, and it is increasingly going to get shorter and faster. There are right now 325,000 applications, and the average price is 99 cents in that. I would argue that before long, if you are teaching a course, you will have an application for that course. If you're teaching a course, rather than getting the syllabus, which is an industrial age model, imagine if what I get is an app. And I'm not just talking about a page in your LMS, your WebCT, or your Blackboard, but an app. In other words, that has my internal and external social network, has my assignments, literally may, in fact, at some point ask the learners to do a mob-up. And what a mob-up, I have a friend who's doing that. He regularly sends a note to all of the students, and he's actually teaching an on-campus course on another campus. He'll send them a note on a half an hour's notice to meet him at an exotic place on campus, and they have a conversation